Welcome back to Rapture Tales. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and get ready for another story you won't forget. Let's dive back to the story. Caroline James entered her marriage with a quiet kind of hope, the type that didn't announce itself loudly but lived in small sacrifices and steady faith. She had met Simon Hale years earlier at a modest networking event hosted by a struggling manufacturing firm where Simon worked as a junior operations officer. Caroline had been there not to network but to deliver handmade furniture samples for her late father's former client. Simon noticed her not because she was loud or flashy, but because she listened, truly listened, when he spoke about his ambitions. Caroline came from a humble upbringing shaped by discipline, patience, and dignity. Her father, Thomas James, had been a carpenter all his life, a man who believed that character mattered more than comfort. He raised Caroline alone after her mother died, teaching her to value effort, kindness, and restraint. When Simon pursued her, Caroline believed she had found a partner who admired her values. What she didn't know was that Simon admired her usefulness, not her worth. Their early years of marriage were modest. They lived in a small rented duplex near the industrial side of the city. Caroline worked as a procurement assistant at a logistics firm, while Simon eventually left his job to start a small import business with borrowed money and overconfidence. Caroline supported him wholeheartedly, emotionally, financially, and psychologically. She cooked late into the night, revised his business proposals, took on extra freelance administrative work, and even sold personal items to help fund his ventures. She never complained. She believed that marriages were built during hard seasons, not easy ones. Simon, however, slowly began to change. As his business struggles mounted, so did his ego. He started resenting Caroline's calm strength, interpreting her quiet resilience as silent judgment. To Simon, every failure needed a scapegoat, and Caroline, gentle, loyal, unassuming, was the easiest target. As months turned into years, Simon's tone toward Caroline hardened. He mocked her simplicity, belittled her background, and frequently reminded her that she brought nothing valuable into the marriage. Caroline endured it with grace, convinced that patience would eventually soften him. She spent her free time reading, sketching furniture designs, an old habit from helping her father, and volunteering quietly at a local shelter. Her dream was simple: stability, peace, and a home filled with warmth. Simon's dream, however, had become distorted by comparison and envy. He obsessed over wealth, status, and appearances. He hated that other men his age were succeeding while he remained stuck. Each failure fed his bitterness, and slowly, Caroline became the symbol of everything he despised about his life. The breaking point came on a rain-soaked night when Simon returned home drunk on humiliation rather than alcohol. His latest deal had collapsed after investors pulled out, citing poor planning. He stormed into the house, eyes burning with rage, and unleashed years of pent-up resentment. He accused Caroline of being cursed, of draining his luck, of holding him back. His words were cruel, calculated, and merciless. He tore into her character, her upbringing, even her deceased father. Caroline stood frozen, absorbing each insult in stunned silence. When Simon demanded that she leave, she initially thought it was another empty threat. But when he shoved her small bag toward her and opened the door, she realized he was serious. With no friends nearby and no family left, Caroline stepped into the night carrying only her dignity, a few clothes, and an old debit card her father had once pressed into her hand with a mysterious smile. The streets were unforgiving. Caroline wandered through unfamiliar neighborhoods, clutching her bag tightly, avoiding dark corners and suspicious stares. She spent the night sitting on a bus bench near a closed cafe, fighting tears and exhaustion. Memories of her father's voice echoed in her mind, not as flashbacks, but as lessons ingrained into her character. Never beg, never steal, and never let bitterness take root. At dawn, she realized she needed to leave the city. Her village was far, and she needed just enough money for transportation. That was when she remembered the card. Her father had told her it was her inheritance, nothing more. She had never questioned it. She had never used it. With cautious hope, Caroline made her way to a nearby bank branch, unaware that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. Inside the bank, the atmosphere was calm, almost painfully ordinary. Caroline approached the counter where a young teller named Sandra Lewis greeted her with professional detachment. Sandra came from a middle-class family and prided herself on spotting suspicious transactions quickly. Caroline explained she needed to withdraw a small amount. When Sandra inserted the card and entered the details, her screen froze momentarily. Then her face drained of color. Her breath caught. A sharp scream escaped her lips before she could stop herself, silencing the entire bank. Customers turned. Security stiffened. The branch manager, Raymond Collins, rushed over. As he reviewed the account details, his composure cracked. The balance stared back at him, over $10 million. The name matched. The documentation was flawless. Caroline stood trembling, convinced something terrible had happened. Instead, Raymond gently invited her into his office. He explained everything carefully, respectfully, and with growing admiration. Thomas James, her father, had been far more than a carpenter. Over decades, he had quietly invested in foreign construction supply firms, reinvesting profits and maintaining anonymity. He believed wealth revealed people's true nature and feared it might corrupt Caroline if she inherited it too easily. He left instructions that the funds be released only when she came seeking help out of need, not ambition. Caroline wept, not from joy, but from the overwhelming realization of how deeply her father had understood life. In the weeks that followed, Caroline was guided carefully through legal processes, financial education, and security planning. Raymond became a mentor, not exploiting her vulnerability but strengthening her confidence. Caroline refused extravagance. Instead, she studied markets, supply chains, and ethical business practices. She decided to honor her father by building something real, an agricultural export company that empowered small farmers and emphasized sustainability. Meanwhile, Simon's life unraveled. His business collapsed entirely. His reputation suffered. He blamed everyone but himself, never imagining that the woman he cast into the streets was quietly rebuilding her life with patience, purpose, and unshakable grace. By the time Caroline officially launched her company, she was no longer the woman Simon remembered. She carried herself with calm authority, clarity, and self-respect. She was still kind, but no longer fragile. As her company expanded rapidly, acquiring smaller firms and stabilizing failing enterprises, fate slowly tightened its grip. Simon's company, desperate and drowning in debt, unknowingly entered negotiations with Caroline's firm. The stage was being set, and the test her father had foreseen, the one that would reveal the strength of her heart, was only just beginning. Caroline's company grew with a quiet force that startled seasoned industry players. She named it James Continental Exports, not as a tribute for public applause, but as a private vow to remain anchored to the values that had shaped her. She spent long days visiting farms, ports, and processing facilities, listening more than she spoke, observing inefficiencies others ignored. Caroline refused shortcuts. Every contract had ethical clauses, every supplier was vetted, every employee paid fairly. This approach slowed early expansion but built fierce loyalty. Her evenings were often spent alone in her apartment, studying trade regulations, commodity futures, and logistics models, sketching plans the way she once sketched furniture designs beside her father. She slept little, not from anxiety, but from purpose. Power had not changed her, it had clarified her. Simon, meanwhile, spiraled. His once ambitious import company became a hollow shell weighed down by bad loans and unpaid vendors. Former allies avoided his calls. His board of directors, fearful of total collapse, forced him to relinquish partial control in hopes of attracting external investment. Pride bruised but desperation louder, Simon agreed. He was never told the name of the potential investor, only that negotiations would be handled through intermediaries. He spent sleepless nights rehearsing explanations, rewriting narratives, convincing himself that bad luck, not incompetence, had ruined him. Caroline never crossed his mind. To him, she had vanished into irrelevance the night he threw her out. Negotiations began in neutral boardrooms filled with glass walls and cautious smiles. Caroline attended every meeting remotely at first, listening to Simon's presentations through secure feeds. She recognized his voice instantly. It no longer carried confidence, only defensiveness masked as authority. She authorized her legal team to proceed but insisted on transparency and operational reforms as non-negotiable terms. Simon resisted at first, bristling at oversight, but debt left him no leverage. Each concession felt like swallowing broken glass. Still, he told himself survival mattered more than pride. He never suspected the calm, anonymous investor tightening conditions around him was the same woman he had once called a curse. As weeks passed, Caroline prepared for the final phase, a formal acquisition meeting that required her physical presence. Her advisors cautioned her, emotion clouds judgment, they warned. Caroline listened, reflected, and decided anyway. Not for revenge, but for closure. She arrived at Simon's office building dressed simply, power understated, posture composed. When she entered the boardroom and Simon lifted his head, recognition struck him like a physical blow. The room went silent. His face drained of color. Words failed him. Caroline introduced herself calmly as the majority stakeholder. The truth settled heavily in the air. Simon's knees buckled, and he fell, overcome by shame, begging forgiveness in front of colleagues who had once feared him. Caroline did not raise her voice. She did not humiliate him. She stated her terms with clarity and restraint. Simon would keep his position temporarily, under strict performance metrics and ethical oversight. She was there to rebuild a company, not destroy a man. But she corrected one thing with precision: she was no longer his misfortune. She was his employer. The board approved the restructuring unanimously. Simon signed with trembling hands, fully aware that the power dynamic he once abused had reversed permanently. News of the acquisition rippled through industry circles. Caroline became a subject of quiet admiration, a leader who rescued failing enterprises without spectacle. Her reputation drew partnerships and scrutiny alike. Amid this rise, one constant presence emerged: Vincent Collins, Raymond's younger cousin and a senior compliance strategist seconded to Caroline's firm. Vincent had known Caroline before the money, when she was still navigating paperwork and uncertainty. He admired her restraint, her refusal to let bitterness dictate direction. Their relationship unfolded slowly: shared work trips, late-night strategy sessions, conversations about integrity, loss, and rebuilding. Vincent had always believed in character over charisma. Caroline, cautious but open, found herself trusting again. Simon watched from a distance as Caroline flourished. Working under her leadership forced him to confront truths he had long avoided. There were no dramatic confrontations, only the daily weight of accountability. Caroline treated him professionally, never cold, never warm. That neutrality was its own lesson. Slowly, Simon understood that the greatest punishment was not revenge, it was being allowed to live with the consequences of his choices while witnessing the life he might have had. Caroline and Vincent's bond deepened into love rooted in respect rather than dependency. When Vincent proposed, it was quiet and intentional. No crowd, no spectacle, just certainty. Caroline accepted, not because she needed saving, but because she had found an equal. Their wedding was intimate. Simon attended quietly, seated at the back, observing a joy he no longer resented but fully understood he had forfeited. There was no bitterness in Caroline's eyes when she noticed him, only peace. In the end, Caroline reflected on her father's wisdom. The money had been transformative, yes, but it was the timing that mattered. He had waited until life stripped away illusions, until desperation tested her heart. Only then had the inheritance revealed itself. Caroline was no longer defined by what she endured, nor by what she owned. She was defined by what she chose to become. And in that choice, she found freedom, love, and a future built not on luck, but on character. That's all for today. Like, subscribe, and see you in the next episode. Stay tuned.